In this lecture, we are going to understand some of the basics of classical theory of income and employment. Let us begin with the classical postulates. The main postulates of the classical economics are: number 1, there is always full employment. The classical economists postulated that all employable resources, labor or capital of a country are always fully employed in the long run. If there is unemployment at any time, then there is a tendency towards full employment provided there is no external or government interference within the functioning of the economy. In the classical view, full employment does not mean that all the resources are fully employed. There might be frictional and voluntary unemployment in the state of full employment. Number 2, the economy is always in the state of equilibrium. The classical economists postulated that an economy is always in the state of equilibrium. They believe that full employment of resources generates incomes on the one hand and goods and services on the other. The value of goods and services is always equal to incomes. The income earners spend their entire income. This implies that the entire output of goods and services is sold out. There is no journal overproduction and there is no journal underproduction. But there is a necessary condition on which this postulate depends. The classical postulates of full employment and equilibrium are based on the assumption that the economy works on the principles of laissez-faire. A laissez-faire system is one in which there is complete absence of government control or regulation of private enterprise except to ensure free competition. There is complete absence of monopolies and restrictive trade practices. If there is any, it is eliminated by law. There is complete freedom of choice for both the consumers and the producers, and the market forces of demand and supply are fully free to take their own course. Number 3, money does not matter. The classical economists treated money only as a medium of exchange. In their opinion, the role of money is only to facilitate the transactions. It does not play any significant role in determining the output and employment. The levels of output and employment are determined by the availability of real resources, that is, labor and capital. These are the three postulates of classical macroeconomics. In nutshell, we can say that the classical economists held the view that an economy based on laissez-faire principles is always in the state of equilibrium at full employment. The free market mechanism ensures optimal allocation of resources so that marginal productivity of factors in all the industries is the same. The workforce is fully employed at the market wage rate. Actual output equals potential output. There is neither underproduction nor overproduction. The entire market system works automatically and it maintains the economy in equilibrium. Whenever there is a deviation from equilibrium, the invisible hands of demand and supply come into operation and bring the economy back to equilibrium. Now, the foundation of classical macroeconomics. The classical theory is based upon Say's law of market. Say's law states that supply creates its own demand. The logic behind this law is that supply of goods itself generates sufficient income to generate a demand equal to the supply of goods. This is how supply creates its own demand. The significance of this simple law is that it is regarded as the core of classical thinking at macro level. The law that supply creates its own demand is generally attributed to a French economist, J.B. Say. The law has therefore come to be known as Say's law. It is regarded as the beginning of sound thinking in macroeconomics. This law can be explained in the context of both a barter and a monetized economy. In a barter economy, with division of labor, people tend to specialize in the production of goods or services which they can produce relatively more efficiently even though they consume many other goods and services. They acquire other goods and services they consume in exchange for their own produce. When they offer their produce and barter for other goods, they create demand for other goods. For example, a farmer offers his surplus produce, say wheat, to the weaver in exchange for cloth. Thus, he creates demand for cloth. The weaver who is in need of wheat produces surplus cloth, which creates demand for wheat. Thus, production of wheat creates demand for wheat. In this kind of an economy, there cannot be overproduction or underproduction. The reason is, in a barter economy, people produce goods for own consumption. They produce what they consume and they produce as much as they consume. The part of produce bartered away for other goods is included in their consumption, so there is no underproduction. Also, people do not produce in excess of their consumption needs. Therefore, there cannot be overproduction as well. If there is under or overproduction at some point of time, it is due to wrong calculation of the consumption need. Say's law applies equally well to the exchange economy where money is used as medium of exchange. That is, goods are bought and sold with the use of money. In an exchange economy, the logic of supply creates its own demand works somewhat differently. Production in a market economy is meant for sale in the market. Production of goods requires employment of factors of production. The employment of factors of production generates money income in the form of wages, interest, rent, and profits. By spending their money income on the goods they produce, they create demand. It follows that if there is production, there is income, and if there is income, there is demand for goods, including demand for goods whose production creates income. Thus, supply creates its own demand in a market economy. The total income generated through the production of a commodity need not be spent on the same good. A part of it may be spent on other goods or even hoarded. This implies that there may be surplus production. But it is not so in the opinion of J.B. Say because a part of income generated in the production of other goods is spent on this commodity and the total production is exhausted. There is no surplus production. By the same reason, there is no underproduction. Say's law was defined and popularized in England by a group of classical economists, especially by David Ricardo, which is known as the classical formulation of Say's law. The classical formulation of Say's law states that in a capitalist economy, total supply always equals total demand and that there cannot be general underproduction or general overproduction. In the opinion of classical economists, underproduction and overproduction are only transitory. They are caused by factors external to the economy and are always minor and temporary. That is, there might be short term imbalances in the demand for and supply of a commodity caused by the exogenous factor. This short term imbalance is corrected and equilibrium restored in a capitalist economy by the market forces. When there is underproduction, demand exceeds supply. This leads to rise in prices, which reduces demand on the one hand and encourages supply on the other. Similarly, when there is overproduction, prices decrease. Decrease in price results in decrease in supply on the one hand and increase in demand on the other. This demand and supply adjustment restores the equilibrium. Thus, in the long run, a market economy will always be in equilibrium, though there may exist disequilibrium in case of individual goods in the short run. Now, assumptions of classical theory. Number 1, laissez-faire economy. That is, economy is free from any kind of interference by the state. Number 2, perfect competition. There is perfect competition in commodity as well as labor market. Number 3, closed economy. That is, foreign trade has no effect on the economy. Number 4, constant technology. There is no change in the techniques of production in the short period. And number 5, production is subject to law of diminishing returns, that is, total product increases at a decreasing rate. That's all in this video. Thank you.